Ukraine is the, not victim, I don't like that word, but Russia's not even a bully. They're just, it's evil. It's evil. And if you don't do anything about that, there's blood on our hands too. That's how I feel about it. So I want to make sure other people know that too.
Welcome to Storytelling Ukraine, the podcast of amazing stories. Make sure to listen till the end, because the best stories are told when the guests are about to leave. And I'm very happy and very honored that our guest today is Joshua Kreimeyer. Hello, Joshua.
Hello.
So every time we meet with new guests in the podcast, before jumping right to the storytelling, we need to sort of create the context, right? So how did it happen that you actually have a Ukraine story to share?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm not going to talk about my whole life story, but for me it really does start young in childhood. I grew up in Minnesota in the United States in an area that had a lot of Slavic immigrants. There was a large Jewish population there. In fact, we got Jewish holidays off of school.
Wow.
And because of that, there was just a lot of Russians, Ukrainians, mostly Jewish, that were there. Others settled, but we had restaurants and markets and stuff. So I grew up with that. Also during the Cold War, I'm a kid of the Cold War, so I was just interested in, this part of the world. That was kind of a general sense. Fast forward to high school, I had a Ukrainian girlfriend that I dated, for about a year. She was a good girlfriend back then. So that happened, and then the next major point for me was I joined the Army, and I got to go to language school as part of my work in the military. So I learned Russian. And when I got out of the military, I was like, how can I use this language? How can I use this my heart to like just still be connected? And it took a couple years, but I had a couple things that happened. I worked with some agencies that people would adopt children from this part of the world, and many of them speaking Russian. I would translate for the parents when the kids hadn't learned English yet. So I had that connection, and then fast forward to me being in my doctorate program, 2015, and I was very prayerful about. I remember walking into the room for the interview saying, I need a sign. I'm going to spend $100,000 in 4 years of my life, have a lot of trauma. So I was like, I need a sign. I walk in the room and I hear somebody speaking English with a Slavic type of accent, and I said, "Вы говорите по-русски?" And she said, "Почему?" She didn't say yes, but she ended up being Ukrainian. And this was 2015, so right after Maidan, she had been coming to Ukraine. And as a student, in my doctoral program, I got to use every class as a project here in Ukraine related to mental health. So for example, I had a class called Prevention Psychology, and I got to do a stigma reduction campaign. I did some posters, kind of like the TYUP that's happening now, something similar to that. So did that, and then I did my dissertation here, and I just fell in love. I knew I wanted to be a part of helping. So yeah, since 2015, I've been here so many times that I had to get a new passport. That's all I know how to say. So
that really tells it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. So since 2015, you've been coming, and going like to and fro from the United States to Ukraine. And when you get back to the States and you meet up with your friends and family, and they say, "What's it like? Tell us about it." So what are your stories? What do you share? Like the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is actually not the questions they ask me. The spotlight has been on Ukraine. So I think people know more now about Ukraine than ever before. It's an unfortunate, way to be known, but people basically say to me when I come back, they go, "Do you know how amazing the Ukrainian people are?" And I go, "I know. They really are. That's why I go." But yeah, they ask a lot of questions about how the culture is, how it is intermingling with people, and what are the similarities and differences. So I have lots of stories of, like being more less American. I've learned to not be as engaging on the street, that it can be off-putting sometimes. But in America, even in bigger cities, sometimes people are more willing to connect. And it's not people being rude, it's just this cultural thing. So I'll tell them about that. And That when I hear other Americans when I'm here, like on the metro, for example, and I'm like, I'm Canadian. Like I almost denounce my citizenship because I've acculturated myself here enough where I'm like, rude Americans, like stop being so loud.
Okay.
We can be that way. So, some conversations like that, and then the unique food experiences, that's a great part of any culture. So I like bringing the food back to share with people. But I think the biggest thing people ask right now is just, the spirit of the Ukrainian people. They know that it's been 2 years since the invasion, and that there's 10 years of, all this, really the war the whole time. So they know about Volya. I teach them about that concept. And the way I explained it the last trip, I was here for 6 weeks in December and January. I went back for a couple weeks. I said, to me, it feels like there's still this really strong light, but it is dimming a little. I know it is for me too, as a Ukrainian in my heart, not a natural born citizen, but it is tough. It's hard to have that resilience. Even resilience can have cracks in it,
Exactly.
But we're still vertical. We're still doing things, telling stories like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What are some specific stories that back up some of these nice things you said about Ukraine? Because, it's very specific, but at the same time on a kind of a general level.
Yeah.
So what would be some examples of, stories of resilience, stories of good food, stories of interaction with people?
Yeah, I've got a couple that come to mind. The first is somebody asked me about what I mentioned just a minute ago, how people are on the street, just how are people in general. And I kind of was thinking about it, and they were wondering about my perspective on Ukraine. So it was a person in one of my trainings, so it was a colleague, a fellow psychologist. So we like to analyze things like that. And she said, what do you think? How do you perceive the culture? And it was amazing to me how emotional I got, having been here so much, where I had not thought about this, but my answer that came to me was, as an American, having some significant differences, primarily in that, like how we are, just in general, more gregarious and, and not in a good way or a bad way, just different. But I feel like in my home culture, this is my second home, I kind of view it that way, my culture of origin, let me say it that way, that feels more appropriate to me. But my culture of origin, it feels superficial a lot of times. People are quicker to connect, but it's not always deep. And here, what I feel, this is what I told her, I go, there's the initial kamenoye litso, the stone face. And you see this, and it's off-putting to Americans. Like when I'm teaching, I don't get that feedback. Mm-hmm. I've learned to wait. Yeah, exactly. You can, and I harness it too. When I'm speaking the Ukrainian that I know, the Surjik that I can speak, I have this face, and my family and my children say, do the face. I can't do it on command, but I've learned to harness that.
Do your Ukrainian face.
I can't, I know. That's what I'm saying. It's not a thing, but when I talk, it gets this, my face goes this way. But what I found is it's unbelievable to me. I've had the opportunity to break bread in people's homes and eat all of the amazing foods. And I went to a Ukrainian wedding in a small village near Vinnytsia. And I get emotional because it feels real. It feels much more genuine, much higher quality of connection once you break through that. People are so genuine and loving and caring and giving, and love talking about the culture. As an outsider, once I can sit at someone's table and they tell me, I'm like, oh, everything has meaning too. I don't think in America we're such a mix of cultures and things that we've lost the meanings, but everybody seems to know these rich meanings. So the relationships and the customs, the things that I see, that's what I told her. That was the first story that came to mind. The second is I'm a veteran myself, Army veteran. I served in Kosovo and Iraq, and then I got injured and became a mental health counselor. In Ukraine, we'd say psychologist. It's the same. I do the same things basically, and now I teach. That's my primary job. But I do have some clients. So one of the pieces of client work that I do, I'm not always just teaching here. I think I've done probably 10 retreats for military families in Ukraine. And we go to these different places, and I have this model that I built. There was a retreat model that I built, and I actually published like a manual on it. It's called Welcome Home Warrior. And in English, it was a very wonderful way to say it. Like, we wanted to welcome them home. But it was a family retreat. It wasn't just for the warrior. So anyhow, built this model, and I was doing a retreat here. We were in Kyiv. We were on the north side of Kyiv at a resort. And there was, we do, the final night, we do a talent show. And the veterans are a little off, they're off-putting when you do any kind of work. They're like, I'm a soldier, I'm tough. You know, in addition to the Ukrainian cultural stoicism, they're even more tough, you know. But I feel like we did such great work breaking some of that down, and they know that they needed to talk about the stuff they'd seen a little bit, and just life, and so it worked. We got to that point. So the last night, this veteran who had questioned me the first night, he's like, why are we doing on the last night a talent show? And I tried to explain it to him, but I go, you just have to experience it. I go, just trust me. He's like, well, I don't sing, I don't dance. I go, well, we've got internet, so you could show something from YouTube. You could. And I saw his eyes light up, so I was like, okay. So he comes up front, and he had a beautiful wife and 2 beautiful children, just such a good-looking family and such good people. And I saw right away he couldn't even speak. Just going up there, he had a company to make shirts. He printed these shirts, and he was so proud that he was able to support his family this way. And he told me, so he shared the website of the shirt, and he showed the screen printing process, and they had just bought this factory to like do it. He had 2 people working for him, other veterans. And it was just amazing. He said, that's why we're fighting. He goes, I know what freedom to do that is, and it's such a powerful thing to be able to support your family in that way. And he gave me a shirt as a gift at that retreat. It was a Sich Battalion shirt, yeah. So I have this polo shirt with it, and he told me about the meaning. And I guess if I could, one more short story, it's related to that. So that's the second one. And then the third one was actually one of the first stories, but it ties to this thread of everything being so meaningful. And again, I think I miss that. I like thinking deeply about things, and it makes me feel a part of something bigger, these cultural things here that I've learned. I had done a conference, I'm trying to remember where it was. It was in Kyiv somewhere, and it was a faith-based conference. They had some psychologists in this seminary program that were doing both, maybe like faith integration. I don't know their program, but something like this. So we did 4 hours on trauma. We talked about trauma from a mental health perspective, all of these things. And at the end of the day, myself and this Austrian guy who was in my program, they said, come to the front. And they had the, how do you call it, boulevard? Boulevard?
Boulevard.
Boulevard, yeah,
Yes.
the mace. And it was like, we have this gift for each of you. And they spent 15 or 20 minutes talking about how it's a symbol of power, and the man should put it on the fireplace at home to show that he protects his family, and it's passed to the president to symbolize the transfer of power, and all these things. And I was just like, wow. And we had brought gifts too for translators, for some of the people, and I felt so horrible. I know they appreciated what we brought, but they had this very meaningful thing, and it was presented to us, and everybody stood up. Mm-hmm. And I brought a little magnet to put on a refrigerator of the mountain where I live, and it's a very cool picture. It was a very nice magnet. But I was like, oh, here's something that doesn't have as much meaning for you. But I've just noticed that in sitting with people, doing these events. I love that. Mm-hmm. I love the deeper meaning to many things.
So deep and meaningful, yeah.
Yeah.
So coming to a new culture, there's always a learning curve.
Oh, yes.
And there are mistakes along the way.
Yes.
So do you recall any sort of misunderstanding, some misconception, some,
Yes.
like that? I know this American volunteer who was flirting with a shop assistant, but he didn't know that a married woman in Ukraine carries, the ring on the right hand, not on the left hand.
Yes.
Yeah. So things like that. Maybe
Yeah.
little things. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, there's one that's not related. Well, it is related to being here. So I actually have rings on both hands.
Okay.
And I just told somebody this story this morning where this is what we do in America. We wear it on our left hand, and right, some religious, does everybody or just some religious flavors of religion wear the ring on the right hand, or is it most people wear on the right hand?
I would say like the overwhelming majority.
Okay.
The Catholics, they may choose
different.
to carry it on the left hand, but even in Ukraine, Catholics,
Yes.
Greek Catholics, they carry
Yeah.
the ring on the right hand.
Yeah, that's what I see. So I thank you. I didn't actually know for sure, but at any rate, I've come here enough. At one point, I said I want to get a ring, just so I fit in a little bit. And I didn't have any problems. Nobody asked me about it. I didn't have women coming up to me or anything. It was
strange.
I know. It was just something I wanted to do. So I got this ring and I called my wife. And I didn't think about how I was saying this to her. I was very excited. I said, her name's Amy. I said, Amy, I'm married in Ukraine. And she said, to who? And I said, oh. So, that wasn't an awkward moment with another Ukrainian, but it was related to the culture. And I was like, oh, whoops. And she understood right away.
Sure.
But for a moment, she was very upset with me.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Hey, honey, I got married here.
Yes.
Look at this beautiful ring.
I know. Yeah, she understands now why I was excited about that, and I clarified what I meant with that. And yeah, I think the teaching that I primarily do, probably 2/3 teaching, and then supervising, and the retreats is probably 1/3 of what I do. So a lot of the teaching I do, I've noticed different cultural perspectives on teaching. That the old way, which is true in America too, there was an older way of teaching where as a professor, I know something that you don't know. I'm up here, you're down here. You will listen to me, I will just say things that you don't know, and then you'll leave and you'll do what you want with those things. And my teaching style has evolved to be very, what we call experiential. Like I want people to not just learn the thing, I want them to apply it, have discussion about it. And so people are slow to warm here. I have to work on, if I have a multiple day training, I don't push too hard the first day, I've learned. But I've had some awkward moments where I push too hard. And then I get, I would say it this way, like the crickets chirping in the background. I try to have them do something and everybody just sits there with the stone face.
Yeah.
But they usually report, once we've opened up and made that connection, they report that they really like it. It's just what they're used to. So I've had to adapt that. And another aspect of the teaching too is the, how would I say it? Like calling somebody out for something in public. There's more of a sense of shame on people. I'm used to like using something as a teachable moment. If somebody does something, I will say it in English in a nice way, like not like you were horrible at that. I'll be like, oh, I'm trying to think of a way I might say it. Well, how were you thinking then? Because there's some different ways you could do that. And for the English, it sounds softer and culturally people understand. But here I've seen almost fear and shock on people's eyes. And I've realized I've had enough close friends that I've made in these teachings where they told me how they felt, and I'm like, I feel horrible. I don't want people to feel that way, but I've noticed I've had to adjust in both of those ways, because I'm in the world to help people, especially as a psychologist, not hurt them. But yeah, just the look, like a hurt puppy almost, is a way that I would think of saying it. So I've definitely had some awkward, tense moments with those. And then I think the other example would just be the food. There's a lot of times where I've had food and what did I have? Oh, holodets. I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
It looked a little funny to me. We don't have anything like this in America at all. But they said, you have to eat this. And I'm like, okay, no pressure. But I sat down and I ate it and I couldn't control my response.
I see.
It was, and I felt horrible because we were at the dacha, we were at their little village cabin. I've had a couple moments like that. I almost don't want to say it because anybody watching, I don't want to lose my status as an honorary, Ukrainian. But salo, I had the first time.
Yeah.
But I found there's just kinds of salo that I like.
Okay.
Like I really like the dried.
The dried or the smoked one?
Or the smoked, yeah.
Yes.
Just not like the wet, raw. That was the texture.
The texture,
Yeah.
yes.
So-
Holodets is like meat jelly. So imagine that you make like chicken broth or meat broth, and then you make a jelly out of it, and then there's some meat, well, not floating, but like stuck in it. So that's holodets, and then salo is like lard. Yeah, it's like pork fat, which they say Ukrainians really like. But well, first of all, it's not only Ukrainians who like salo; it's really an Eastern European thing.
Yes.
And secondly, well, statistically, I don't think that we are really, such big fans of salo anymore.
I've noticed that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you see when you walk the streets, you see at souvenir stands the little like plastic bacon fat keychains and things, and it's celebrated, and it is like you said, this part of the world. But yeah, that's what I've noticed too. Some people are liking it, and some people are like, no, and holodets is the same way.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are some things that come to mind. I've learned from each of them. I have less and less. I did have one on this trip actually. We're here in Lviv right now, and having been a veteran, and I've been to combat twice, I had 2 deployments, I sometimes am sensitive to like the ground shaking or something. So in this hotel, we're right by the street, and the buses are driving right by, and the whole thing will shake. And the first day I was here, it felt like maybe something hit. I checked the air raid alert, I didn't see anything, but then I didn't know there wasn't a metro here. So I was in the training, and I was telling them that. I go, man, I didn't sleep well. I'm here, I'm ready to teach, but the metro shook me, and I thought it was a bomb. And I saw people kind of go, like talking to each other. And then I went, oh yeah. And I remembered, I had forgotten there's no metro, but that's what it felt like, because the whole ground was shaking.
Just shaking.
I just think it's cobblestone roads and the buses being so close. So that was interesting. But I heard that there's actually a joke about that.
Yes.
Have you heard this?
Yeah.
Like a meme and a Facebook page maybe where it's like the Lviv metro.
The Lviv metro, exactly. Yes. Well, it's a big thing. Yes. Yeah. Because back in the Soviet Union times, every city in the Soviet Union that had like 1 million plus inhabitants was entitled to have a metro, and then there would be like a line in the budget, and they would start the construction of the metro. And Lviv was always like short of this 1 million, and the metro never came here. And and there are a lot of jokes about it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. I didn't know that piece. I've not been to Lviv as much. Okay. Very beautiful. But anyhow, it was they were laughing at my expense. But I knew. I did know. I remember. Yeah. But I said it again. I said it twice in the training. Anyhow. So yeah, there's definitely those moments. To be cross-cultural is to make yourself vulnerable to those moments. No matter how much you know about another culture, you will learn things, and you have to be okay with the English phrase, I would say, putting your foot in your mouth, like foot, it's just embarrassing moments, and you gotta laugh.
Exactly.
You have to. The only one I felt bad at was making the students feel bad for trying to make a teachable moment. That I was like, crush my heart, but.
Yeah. So you've organized 10 retreats so far, and
yes.
I assume there were participants from all over Ukraine.
All over Ukraine. Yeah.
Have you noticed any differences in the way that people behave, present themselves, stay engaged in the training, depending on where they're from?
Yes. Yes, I have. Like the eastern part of Ukraine, we get people that come there, and number one, they're getting shelled more. They were under the yoke more, I believe, even before troops invaded, even though they didn't, right? Before the invasion, it was like, no, they don't have uniforms on. And it's like, these big burly men, that look like military men, shaved head, they're touring and visiting in a group of 20. Yeah, I don't think so. So I think the stone face is a little stronger. I think there's a little more, they've been broken down a little bit more. I feel they're not always as engaged right away. I do feel sometimes when I try to use humor in my teaching too, and the look sometimes, my interpretation of what I see is, why are you being flippant about what's going on? Mm-hmm. But I'm very aware of this possibility, so I always speak it out. And that's a lot of what I consider what I do as a psychologist too, is making the unspoken spoken.
Right.
Like expectations in a marriage, we don't talk about it, but you get angry when somebody does something. And culture is like that. We have expectations or shoulds, But I know as a psychologist, I don't want anybody coming to a training during wartime to not have a break. I'm very aware it's not just training. I'm very deliberate, and I mention it, I talk about it, I make it spoken. I say I want everybody to know that I'm going to be very deliberate about taking the war seriously, but I don't want to just sit at all the time and just say it's so heavy, it's so heavy. So I feel like that helps. But I've had experiences where people from the East look at me a certain way. Gotten better with that. And then, I think just north, south, east, and west, there seems to be some major differences. I don't know a whole lot about Odessa. That's one place I haven't been, but from what I understand, more Russian speaking before the invasion, not necessarily aligned with Russian, but sea culture. I see pictures and it just looks kind of like a coastal
Mediterranean.
Mediterranean, it looks a certain way. People that I've met from there, I've met some, I've never been, and I've worked with some people, they seem a little more, not aloof, but relaxed. I don't know if it's the fresh salt air that just helps them in a way, but I know
sun.
the sun. But I know they've been getting shelled more too. That part of the country, and then Kyiv. Kyiv, where I mostly am. That's where I spend the majority of my time. Big city. So to be honest, I don't like that as much. I do like the villages. I like the wedding that I went to was my translator and my sound technician that I introduced after a training. I just said, "Do you want to go for coffee?" And she called me their Cupid. And because they were both a little shy, I think. Okay. And I said, well, I wasn't intending for this, but a year later they had a wedding.
There you go.
We got to go as a small village.
Just matchmaking.
Yeah, matchmaker. I got to put this on my business card, I guess,
exactly.
here. But it was such an honor to go there. But that I really liked. It was called Shahorod, this very small village. And it was, it feels like home. And actually, if I may, I forgot about a story kind of from how I came here. When I was a kid, I remember learning, I loved geography, and I loved there's a magazine called National Geographic that I loved, and I was such a nerd. I had the maps up on my wall as a kid, and I loved the world and other cultures, and I remember learning in class or in those magazines somewhere about where I grew up in Minnesota. My family I'm one generation off the farm. We lived in the suburbs, but we had a family farm that we got to go see, do a little bit of weekend stuff. So it was in my DNA in a sense. But the soil there is so rich. The icebergs during the Ice Age came down through where the state is and then pushed back as they melted, and all the minerals went into the soil. So you can take the soil there, it's black, and you take it apart and you can stick it together and it goes back together. So we are very proud of that. And I learned then there are 3 places in the world that have this quality of soil. One of them is the Amazon basin, all the minerals that come out from the Amazon, and the other is here in Ukraine. Right. So there's something about that I feel this connection to also. The stories and folk songs I've heard about fighting the dirt in our nails, and the word, I hear some of the words that I've learned, and anyhow, I feel a kinship to that as well. So just add that piece to my story.
That's a beautiful piece. Yeah. It's, the soil connection.
Yeah. I don't plan on going. I'm a psychologist.
Yeah.
I need to, but
no dirt on the fingers.
No dirt on the fingers. Yeah. But we did buy some land in Kyiv.
There you go.
We're hoping to build a small house so we can be here more. Our kids are grown. We want to be able to help more. My wife has kind of a vision for what she wants to do too, helping. And we'll have a garden there. I think I'm going to tap into some of my roots. We bought, is it Sotki?
Yeah.
The acres. Yeah, it's a few acres of land. It's a nice piece for a house, small garden, fire pit, things like this. So
beautiful.
But yeah, I think we'll fit in.
Definitely. There's the expression of soulmate, but you will be soil mate.
Ooh, yeah, that's good. I like that.
The black soil from Minnesota and the black soil in Ukraine, soil mate.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Let's put a trademark on that.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, that seed was planted in my mind.
There you go.
I might use that somewhere.
Okay, excellent. Going back to comparisons,
Please.
because one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is to tell more about Ukraine, to let people really see the true story, not something that is shown in the news. It's mostly negative things. But as a teacher, you probably know that one of the best ways to teach is through comparison.
Yes.
Like something people know, comparing with something they don't, and you know,
Yes.
showing the similarities and differences. So you worked with veterans in the US, and you've been exposed to working with the veterans in Ukraine. So what are the similarities and differences?
Yeah, there's many. You know, I actually see more. I've been asked that question before by veterans that I've worked with, and I have the pobratimi, the brotherhood with them. I'm already in. I talk a lot in my teaching about a perimeter. In the military, we establish this perimeter. We face outward and protect everything in the middle. And with military culture, which is just a subculture within any culture, you really need that. You need to feel safe, secure, you know.
Yeah.
So I have a card, you know, I can get right in there and they'll ask me this too, you know, like, what is it like? And it really is amazing how much and how close the kinship is that I feel as a veteran myself. Talking the talk, walking the walk. Dark humor comes to mind. I tell some stories in my teaching, and when I've used them in the retreats, because we do a little teaching too, some psychoeducation we call it, to help the veterans understand trauma and different things. I see them laughing at things that are sometimes morbid or grotesque, but that's what you need to do to survive when you're on the front. But they worry about what outsiders will do if they'll be judged. Same thing in America. They hold on to it. And I had a US veteran that said, if I told other people this thing, they would think I'm a monster. That was his words. And I've heard the same thing here, that they say, I can't tell anybody, and I don't want to burden my family with it. So the same pattern of struggling when you come back from the front, holding on to things. So that's one of my goals, is helping people see, like, it doesn't, if you drink, that just covers it up. It doesn't go away. You have to like talk about it. One of the things I learned from a World War II vet, I got to work with a couple of World War II vets in America, and he said, you know, one of the major differences for you guys is that you were in the war zone and you could be on a helicopter and back home in a day or two. He goes, we were on a ship for 3 weeks. He goes, he looked right at me, he said, if you tell anybody this, I will kill you. So I think he'll understand when I say this. He meant it kind of as a joke, you know, in a sense, and I don't think he's alive anymore, but please, I'm using this as a moment to, to share, to teach, but it was very meaningful. He said, we had 3 weeks on a ship, so we hugged, we laughed, we cried, we shook, and we don't get that always, that there's historical markers here and in America, tribal roots of not letting warriors come into the city gates when they come back from war. Not because they're scared of them, but because they know they need to do something. And we've lost that here, and we've lost that in the US. The thing here that I think is different is people are seeing it more, like Cossack traditions and the Ukrainian warrior traditions. And I see people doing more grassroots rehabilitation. There's not as many government resources always, right? The Department of Veterans Affairs is building, and it's not as well structured for supporting veterans. There's many great things happening here, but I see the traditions being a lot more used. In America, we're further removed from them. We had so many years of surplus, and the economy was so good, people got soft. So when people in America come back from war, it's like, just get a haircut, get a job. So I feel like there's much to do here. Veterans still don't have retreats, they don't have structured things. We need to have good food for them, and be very intentional about kind of some structure. We don't have that. However, in the villages and stuff, it's amazing. People talk about the lack of some of these resources, but then they tell me what they do, where it's like, hey, my uncle has a farm, and he's not there. He let me stay there for like 6 weeks, and I brought 4 of my brothers there. It's like, people figure it out, and they know. Like, don't just jump back in. I'm not getting fired at every day. Just get a haircut, get a job, right? All of these things. It is hard. It's fifth gear to first gear, and people don't understand if they haven't been there always. So I think I would actually say better in some ways here. I like those, and I want to help be culturally aware of that and honor that and add some of that deeper historical perspective. And even in the Old Testament of the Bible, one of my clients told me about stories during all the war in the Old Testament of the Bible where they would not go into the gates. They would have this cleansing ritual. So I feel like we're closer to doing that here.
I see.
But yeah, I think there's more similarities. Those are some of the differences. There is, of course, the other major difference too is the war is here in our backyard here. I don't fully even understand. I understand, but I don't. It's so different for me. It'd be like, I live in Colorado, it'd be like China coming into California. And that's never even been close to a thing that I know of in my lifetime. Yeah. So that part, it hits differently, I think.
Yeah, the closest there was Soviet Union in Cuba, but
that's true. Yeah,
but that was like for a short moment, and
yeah. So I feel like that endears more of a fighting spirit. Okay. I feel like people are, get the blank off my land. Like I feel that. It feels to me outside looking in that the veterans here are a little tougher. Mm-hmm. They got a little more to fight for. Our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's in somebody else's country, and we all had to process. Are we the world's police? Why am I going here? And you follow orders.
Right.
So that's different. We process it a little differently. We were a little softer to it. One of the benefits of generational trauma coming through Holodomor, the famine,
yes.
Historically, all these things in this part of the world, different major governments and fighting forces coming back and forth, just throughout history, I think it does build the DNA of volia and strength and will and resilience, but we're human first, so
right.
I'm glad they're doing what they're doing, and I know right now their light is dimming too. It's been, some people have been there the whole 2 years, I'm sure you and other people listening know.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to see. They are inspiring. In fact, one quick thing I want to make sure I can share in our time. I like telling people in Ukraine, so if anybody's listening from Ukraine, and really anywhere, but you see it all over Europe, and I can speak to America. There are more Ukrainian flags in some towns than there are American flags. Mm. And there's a bridge in Denver that goes over the major highway, and every single Friday and Saturday night, so tomorrow night, in Denver, Colorado, they have signs that say some bad things about Putin that I won't repeat here. I don't want to teach
those things.
You don't want to teach the kids any of the bad. They probably know some of these, and it's it's probably fitting, with what's going on. But anyhow, and then there's a big sign in the middle that says "honk if you support Ukraine," and it is just a constant honk. So even today, 2 years later, I want to make sure I get to say that we support maybe the government. People look at the government processes. We're people first, and the people, the world, we're with you.
This is good news.
Yes.
This is good news because we do need that support.
Yes.
We do need that support.
We're trying. Every time I come, there's a group called Ukrainians of Colorado. Mm-hmm. And if I fly Lufthansa, they let me bring humanitarian aid, and I can bring 6 suitcases. Whoa. So I've brought children's clothing, drones, metal plates, medical gear, every trip. When I'm on Lufthansa, they are one of the best at doing that.
Thank you, Lufthansa.
Yeah, Lufthansa is amazing. Yeah, and then I meet, it's kind of funny because the way, when I say it this way, I meet some random Ukrainian in Krakow or Warsaw. It's like, here you go. But they set it all up, and then they get it to the front. And I got to see the warehouse in Colorado. We have rallies at our state capitol. I've gotten to speak at those with my Vyshyvanka on representing Ukraine. So, yeah. So, we might not support war, but we support people, support the soldiers, like I know everybody does here.
Yeah. Great.
Defenders.
The defenders.
Yes.
Yeah. But nevertheless, a lot of people having this positive attitude and supportive attitude to Ukraine, it's not unanimous.
Yeah.
And,
it's true.
It's not so clear for a lot of people.
Yes.
And that's why, this next question is, what is one thing that the whole world gets wrong about Ukraine?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some people erroneously wrongly think that what Putin's propaganda machine propagates also that we're cousins, we're close, and that it's just these rebel factions fighting. And it's not that at all. It's not that at all. In fact, if that was the plan, I know there was other reasonings that you hear about people using, who knows? It's a shell game. They've never said this is the one thing. There's several pieces, but it's like it did not work strengthening those ties, because I think historically maybe there was, and there were some people that said we're still going to watch you, we don't trust you, but I think the thing that people don't know is that this needs to be Ukraine. It's very different, and a lot of things people think of as Russian are actually Ukrainian. Borscht is Ukrainian, right?
It is. Absolutely.
This is not a Russian thing. They co-opt other cultures. They come in, they move Russians. Everybody that studied history knows the methodology. And it's systemic, it's widespread. So it's worth fighting for, because it's such a beautiful culture. And it's not, we're not your brothers, we're not your sisters. I get that feel. I've heard people say these things, and it's like, it's got to be that way. People are ready. They had enough. I feel, as an outsider, people saw enough of the freedoms that they could have in having more open markets, and what that meant for supporting your family and not having as many hard of a life. The veteran that started his shirt company, for example, he told me, he goes, I couldn't have done that before. But recently things got better and I could, and now it's on pause, but I think that's part of what we're fighting for. But I think the other thing I'd say is that it's not just war here. This is not just war. There are horrific atrocities that I don't even think get out always. And I've had firsthand accounts. There's a church that I went to that helped. They had a van in the back, and it said evacuation of children. I could read that. And I was like, whoa. And there was, I think you may have seen, it was, I think, a bigger story on the news, 187 children or something like that. They went and took these kids back, because the Russian forces don't just blow up military targets. They were going into orphanages and taking children and putting them in these camps. And it's just, I know there's some of that gets out, but I don't think a lot does. People listen to the political talking heads, and it's hard not to get a little political, but it's like, this is horrible. And the world, we need to stand with Ukraine. Ukraine is the, not victim, I don't like that word, but Russia's not even a bully. It's evil. It's evil. And if you don't do anything about that, there's blood on our hands too. That's how I feel about it. So I want to make sure other people know that too. Not to stand by idly.
Because not doing anything
Yes.
is also, a crime.
That's exactly it.
If you're witnessing a crime and not stopping it,
That's right. Yep.
you're part of it.
That's right.
Yeah. So that was the world, but how about Ukrainians? What is one thing that Ukrainians get wrong about themselves?
Ukrainians get wrong about themselves.
Yeah.
I do think the stoicism and resilience is a strength. I think sometimes as an American, again, we're kind of soft and too sensitive. And on college campuses now, we have these decompression rooms. If you get too overwhelmed, and it's like without the resistance of gravity, astronauts go into space and their muscles atrophy. We need that resistance. That's how we're made, and we should be sensitive. I don't think we should be throwing our kids into the walls and doing that kind of parenting. Ease up on some of that, but so the stoicism is a strength, but I think we have to I would want to let people know that this is not something that you can just move on from. What happened in the US and most of Europe after World War II is that mental health for everybody got better because people came back from war and they were saying, just again, get a haircut, get a job. But they realized, no, soldier's heart, they called it shell shock, they had these terms. And the government started getting money, grants, and the mental health structure that we have in much of the West today is rooted in war, a response saying we have to do something to help these people who wrote a blank check up to the cost of their life. We can't just, they need something. So assessments, the idea of counseling, talking about things, getting it out, because we have this belief that if I talk about it, it's going to burden the other person, it won't help me, I should just be strong. And I think many Ukrainians have this idea that it's good because we need to stand up and keep living life. However, especially when the bullets stop flying, because no war lasts forever. This will end at some point. So most definitely once it ends, once we have victory, not if, but when. I always like to say that because it helps me too, that we need to talk about things. You need to find some way, it doesn't have to even be psychology, but you can't just hold it in. This has been more than anybody could even fathom. And everybody has seen the pictures, everybody here, even if you're not on the front, you know people that are, or barraged with the reels on social media. So that would be my appeal to Ukrainians. Like, it's good to have Volya, but I hope and pray that we can find ways to reduce the stigma in asking for help and working through the impact of trauma.
That's a wonderful point. And I do hope that people who are listening will really listen to this and accept this.
Yes, because I feel like that's what's happening here after this war. What happened in the U.S. and much of Europe, that's what's happening. I've been in some higher level meetings and people are looking at this and wanting to get money. So that's what I see coming is that mental health will be better here, parallel.
Let's hope for that.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, there are precedents in the world, so wonderful. You've had so many experiences and stories in Ukraine that maybe one day you will write a book about it.
Oh, yes.
So if you were to write a book about Ukraine, what would be the title?
Yes. I actually have a book that I've looked at. I have probably 4 pages of just notes. There are so many amazing stories from the work I've done and more importantly from the people. I've just been able to highlight some things here and I've been racking my brain for how to share that. So I hope this is a spark for me, this interview, like to start coalescing that. And the first thing that I have an idea for, it's called Building the Field of Counseling in Ukraine. Because we have psychology, but psychology is a little more, well, first of all, people can say in Ukraine right now, I'm a psychologist with a bachelor's degree. And we train people to do work behind closed doors, but then we never get confirmation that they're doing effective work. We can do some studies and research, but most of the West, we have live supervision, and we have at least a master's degree level to work with trauma. So we built a program here in Kyiv that is a accredited program to the standards of the US. And our team here, they wanted to do that. We didn't want to be culturally imperialistic and push that, but we told them this is what we do. How does it make sense here? So they're proud to say mental health to American standards, like that stamp. I'm glad that means something. That makes me happy to know. So they're very proud of that. But yeah, it's a master's degree level accredited program now. And I do think that will help because people to get help let their guard down and they're more vulnerable. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can actually inadvertently harm people.
Right.
So it's really a new field. And counseling, so my final thought is that psychology, which I love, it birthed counseling. In the US, we have psychology and counseling. And there's a little friction sometimes. We're the new kids on the block. But counseling emerged in response. Psychology would say, you have some problem. I'm going to help you, and it's removing the problem, like stopping the behavior. That is success. I've helped you. Counseling says, yes, we want to do that, but we also want to focus on wellness. Like, why stop there? Like, my vision when I'm working with someone is if they're willing to work on it, I want to help them become the best version of themselves. And I always say, like, how are you going to use your superpowers for good in the world? We're made for that, to have some kind of meaningful or important work. And people have to do all kinds of different work to make the world run. But you can be your work, it can be your volunteering, it can be whatever. But people get depressed, anxious, either because something happened in the past they haven't gotten over, keeps them from being optimally functioning in the present. But there's this idea kind of too of looking forward. So it's kind of a program theoretical shift. So I'm trying to be sensitive to people. Well, psychology was weaponized too, I know.
True.
The Soviet system, a lot of torture and stuff. So it's more than just a stigma even.
It is more.
Here.
In Russia, they started weaponizing psychiatry again.
Yes.
I just saw the story.
Oh,
that, now
I've
the
heard.
psychiatrists, they can do basically anything. And the people who are in the mental
Evil. Evil.
asylums in Russia, they're not allowed to communicate with the outer world. Imagine that.
Wow.
So it's,
Yeah. So back to the title, I would say, building the field of counseling.
building the field of counseling in Ukraine.
It's this new field, and it's the team I've worked with here is looking at. We had an ethical code that we started with. My first trip here, we had people stand up and say, "I will help with this thing," and they took a year, and we taught them the wording that we used and the parameters, kind of like the bumpers that come up on a bowling alley to help, so the ball goes down.
Right.
We gave them, it should be within these lines, but how does it make sense to you to be ethical in what you do? So that got accepted into law, it was codified here. So we have that, we have a league of trauma therapists. In English, it sounds very, very cool. The Ukrainian people we trained, they call them trauma therapists. Okay. I would say counselor with a focus on trauma. As we've trained them. But we've got ethics, we've got this professional association, and right before the invasion, we were looking at licensing standards, educational standards, because again, there's not a lot of that yet. Many great people doing incredible work, but I want to help make it the best it can be.
Yeah, but that's work.
It is.
If you were to write your personal book of your personal stories, encountering Ukraine. So how would you call it?
Ooh, that's good. I think what comes to my mind is something related to the soil. I might say something like, what do they call that? Tilling soil. Yeah, tilling soil with my Ukrainian brothers and sisters, or something like this. I'm wanting to make the soil in all things that I do richer and better.
Beautiful.
So something like that.
That's a beautiful title.
Yeah.
Yes, and beautiful stories. Thank you so much, Joshua.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
It's an honor.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your time with us. Please hit the subscribe button, the follow button, the like button, everything, because without your help, this podcast is impossible. We've got Patreon, we've got Buy Me a Coffee, so please just follow the links in the description. And finally, let's make this the world of stories and not of headlines. See you soon. Thanks.
That's good.
I made it up myself.
Man, boom.